All right, let's jump into another deep dive. This time, we're taking on Rebecca Yarros's Fourth Wing. And, you've given me some pretty wild excerpts. Dragons, brutal training, a kingdom teetering on the edge. What more could you ask for?
Well, it's definitely a setting ripe for exploration, wouldn't you say? Navarre, this fortress of a kingdom constantly battling enemies, feels like a powder keg ready to explode, and not just from outside forces.
Exactly. And right in the thick of it, we've got Violet Sorrengail, who honestly would rather have her nose in a history book than be learning to fly on the back of a dragon.
It is a kind of jarring contrast, isn't it? Like someone plucking a scholar from a library and dropping them right into a gladiatorial arena.
That's a perfect analogy. This whole internal conflict she's got going on really speaks to a bigger question, the pressure to fit in versus having the guts to chase what you truly love. And her mom, General Sorrengail, well, she's a force of nature herself, really embodies that societal expectation of following a warrior's path. What do you think? Is this kind of clash inevitable, or can duty and personal passion somehow find a way to coexist?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? A question that I think a lot of us grapple with in our own lives, trying to meet expectations but also stay true to ourselves. And the writer's quadrant, where Violet's forced to train, definitely doesn't make things easy. I mean, that 85% survival rate, chilling.
It really makes you think about the price of creating warriors. The parapet challenge, with all its deadly obstacles, that's a prime example. But Violet, instead of giving in to fear, she uses her smarts, her observation skills to make it through. It's almost like her love of history actually prepped her for this, taught her how to strategize and think ahead.
I noticed that too. The way she thinks on her feet during that challenge, it's like a chess player, always several moves ahead. But even with her quick thinking, she's surrounded by complications. There's Dane, her childhood friend, trying to protect her, but honestly ends up pushing her away in the process.
It shows that fine line between caring for someone and accidentally holding them back. Dane's good intentions almost trap Violet in the very role she's trying to escape.
Absolutely. And then we've got Seyden Ryerson, the third-year rider, the mysterious relic, the family tied to rebellion. He's like a storm cloud, powerful, brooding, and totally impossible to ignore.
You can't help but be drawn to him. And the fact that Violet's mother was instrumental in putting down that rebellion just adds another layer of tension between them, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's like they're destined to clash, each representing opposite sides of this historical wound. And the fact that they're both connected to these incredible dragons, well, that just amplifies everything, doesn't it? Speaking of which, these descriptions of the dragons themselves, they're breathtaking.
They really are. So much more than just beasts of burden, that's for sure. The way they bond with their rider, sharing thoughts, even magical abilities, it's fascinating. This whole concept of signets, especially intriguing, suggests that a rider's potential is unlocked through their dragon, almost like a symbiotic relationship. And yet, we see Violet struggling to tap into her dragon's power.
Makes you wonder, is it just a matter of training, or is there something more, something deeper going on? Could there be a connection between a rider's inner turmoil and their ability to wield their dragon's magic?
Oh, that's a good question. And it brings us to this whole mystery surrounding the kingdom's wards, right? We find out they're weakening, which is letting enemies through Navarre's defenses. But then we have Professor Devra dropping these cryptic hints, and then Xaden comes in with this talk of venin and dark magic. Suggests a much more complex threat, doesn't it?
Yeah, it definitely makes you rethink what we perceive as safe. What we thought was protection might actually be masking a hidden vulnerability.
It gets really unsettling. This idea that the wards, built to block traditional magic, might be unintentionally shielding Navarre from something far more sinister.
That's a chilling thought. It really flips the script on what we thought we knew about Navarre's defenses. And speaking of unsettling, the enemy seems to be closer than anyone realizes. Violet stumbles upon Xaden, working with a group of riders who claim to be fighting venin.
But then her squad mate, Liam, he tries to warn her about a connection between venin and these creatures, these wyvern, and then tragically he doesn't make it.
It's heartbreaking, really. A moment that changes everything. Violet's forced to confront the fact that sometimes the enemy you're fighting isn't who you thought it was.
And then, in the middle of all this chaos, she finally manifests her signet, the power of lightning. But it's clearly fueled by anger, desperation.
It's a powerful moment, but also a worrying one. This lightning, while formidable, it has this double-edged sword quality to it, don't you think? It makes you wonder about the potential consequences, whether this is a force she can actually control or if it might end up consuming her.
It's a question that lingers, doesn't it? This idea that power, especially when born from trauma, can be both a weapon and a burden. And her connection with Xaden, oh boy, that just adds another layer of complexity to the whole thing.
Their relationship is like a constant push and pull, isn't it? Attraction, distrust, but also a shared sense of purpose. Despite all the danger, their connection feels like a glimmer of hope in a world that's getting darker by the minute.
It's definitely a relationship that's keeping me hooked, and there's so much more to uncover, so many threads to untangle.
Violet, she's going through the ringer in this writer's quadrant, but she's tougher than anyone gave her credit for. Even the threshing, that crazy ritual where the dragons choose their riders, it throws a real curveball her way.
You're talking about the arrival of Andarna, the golden dragon, right? It really shakes things up. All the other cadets, so stuck in their ways, they see this dragon as an anomaly, almost like a threat.
And Violet, maybe because she's already an outsider, she's drawn to its uniqueness. And it's Andarna, along with that powerful black dragon, Taryn, who chooses Violet. This whole dual bonding thing, I mean, it's like the story's telling us to buckle up because anything can happen. It definitely challenges our assumptions about dragon riders and their connection to these creatures. I mean, just choosing two dragons, does that amplify Violet's power? Or could it create conflict within her, maybe reflecting her own internal struggles?
Oh, those are good questions. And it's not just the dragons that are putting her through the paces. There's Jack Darlow with his constant bullying and his whole strength above all else attitude. He seems dead set on breaking her.
He's almost a caricature of toxic masculinity, isn't he? The kind we see play out in the real world. He dismisses Violet's intelligence, her strategic thinking as weaknesses. He's blind to the strength that comes from those very qualities.
And even the people who are supposed to be on her side, they underestimate her too. Dane, even with his genuine concern for her, he keeps trying to protect her, but it almost feels stifling, like he's pushing her toward a life she doesn't want, even if he means well.
It's that age-old dilemma, isn't it? How do you balance protecting someone you care about with respecting their freedom to make their own choices? Dane's actions, even though they come from a good place, they really show how dangerous it can be to assume you know what's best for someone else.
And while all this is going on, Violet's uncovering secrets that threaten the very foundations of Navarre, finding out that the wards are being intentionally weakened, not just randomly failing. I mean, that adds a whole new level of suspense to the story.
It definitely suggests a conspiracy, doesn't it? A hidden enemy working from the inside to sabotage the kingdom's defenses.
Yeah.
And it's Xaden, the rebel's son, who gives us that missing piece of the puzzle, Venin. These wielders of dark magic, they represent a threat unlike anything Navarre has ever seen before.
Their ability to control minds, manipulate shadows, it's terrifying. Makes you question who you can trust, even within the writer's quadrant. But when Violet tries to warn people about the venin, she's met with skepticism, even from her own mother, the general.
This is where the story really taps into the dangers of blind faith and authority. Navarre's leaders, they're so focused on maintaining the status quo, so convinced of their own strength, that they dismiss Violet's concerns. They're clinging to this outdated worldview.
It's like they're so afraid of facing an enemy they can't control that they refuse to even acknowledge its existence. And as a result, they're leaving the kingdom vulnerable.
It's classic pride before the fall. And Violet, the outsider, the one who sees things differently, becomes the only one who truly grasps the danger.
Makes you wonder if her outsider status, her initial resistance to fitting in, has actually given her a clearer perspective. She's not bound by the same assumptions as the other writers, so she's able to see what they miss.
That's a really insightful point. It speaks to the importance of diverse perspectives and the dangers of clinging to rigid hierarchies. And we see this play out in a very real way during the attack on the outpost. While the other writers are focused on the immediate threat, Violet, she figures out how to neutralize the wyvern, those terrifying creatures created by the venin.
It's a victory, but a bittersweet one, because she discovers that killing a venin also kills their wyvern. It's a horrible dilemma to face, especially in the heat of battle. But it shows Violet's compassion, her unwillingness to take a life unless she absolutely has to.
It really speaks to her character, doesn't it? Even in this world that demands violence, she refuses to become numb to it. And it's in this moment of crisis, while she's battling both external enemies and the poison coursing through her veins, that she finally manifests her signet, the power of lightning.
It's such a powerful scene, this raw force of nature unleashed by her anger and her will to survive. It makes you realize just how powerful she's become. But it also begs the question, is this power a blessing or a curse?
It's both, isn't it? The lightning, it saves lives, but it also has the potential to destroy. And the fact that it's fueled by anger, by rage, well, that adds another layer of complexity to her character.
And just when we think she's starting to get a handle on things, the story throws us another curveball. We find out that Sidon has been working with the enemy, the rioters who are fighting against the Venin.
It's a devastating betrayal, especially because Violet was beginning to trust him, to see him as more than just the dangerous rebel son. And yet, even in her hurt and anger, she can't help but question his motives.
Is he really a traitor, or is there something more to it? Is he fighting some kind of hidden war that Navarre refuses to acknowledge? It keeps you guessing, trying to decipher his actions, his words, looking for a glimmer of truth in all the shadows.
It really shows the author's skill in creating complex characters, doesn't it? Xaden, he's not just a simple villain or a hero. He's a man torn between loyalties, driven by a past that haunts him. And then we learn that he made a deal to protect the children of the rebellion. He pledged their loyalty in exchange for the chance to train as dragon riders. It explains so much about him.
It's a heartbreaking sacrifice, and it explains his guarded nature, his secrecy, but it also makes you admire his courage, his willingness to risk everything for others.
It makes us question our own perceptions of loyalty and betrayal, doesn't it? It forces us to think about situations where the line between right and wrong isn't so clear. And it makes his connection with Violet even more fascinating.
They're both fighting for what they believe in, even as they're caught in this web of conflicting loyalties and dangerous secrets.
Yeah.
And their relationship, despite the betrayals, the distrust, it continues to grow. There's this undeniable tension between them, this mix of anger, attraction, and a growing respect that you just can't ignore.
Their sparring sessions, they become more than just physical training. They're a way for them to test each other, to explore the boundaries of their connection. And then there's that moment when Xaden admits that he can't stay away from Violet, that he's drawn to her strength, her intelligence.
It's a risky thing to admit, given the danger they're both in. But it feels genuine, like a chink in his armor. And Violet, even though she's hurt, she can't help but respond to his vulnerability.
It's like they're drawn together like magnets, even as they try to resist. And their dragons, Tarn and Scale, they're bonded too, which just adds another layer of complexity to their whole relationship.
It's as if their fates are intertwined, whether they like it or not. But just when we think their connection might offer a glimmer of hope, the story throws us another curveball. We learn that Liam, Violet's supposedly loyal squadmate, is also a descendant of the rebellion. And his reasons for joining the Riders Quadrant, well, they're all about revenge against Aiden's father.
It's a stark reminder of how personal vendettas can have ripple effects, shaping the course of history. Liam's thirst for revenge adds this moral ambiguity to the story, makes us question the nature of justice and the cycle of violence that often drives it.
And it puts Violet in an impossible situation. She's surrounded by people she thought she could trust, only to discover that their loyalties are much more complicated than she realized.
It raises the stakes even higher as the story hurtles towards the War Games. This annual competition, designed to test the Dragon Riders, it's about to become all too real. And Violet, with all these revelations swirling around her, she's caught right in the middle.
It's clear that Fourthwing is so much more than just dragons and battles. It's a story about loyalty, betrayal, the weight of the past, and the courage to forge your own path in a world that's constantly trying to define you. And honestly, I can't wait to see what happens next.
Yarros took all that tension and just cranked it up to 11, turning a simple training exercise into a full-blown fight for survival.
You know, these war games, they're actually a pretty brilliant way to show us all those conflicts brewing beneath the surface of Navarre. You see rivalries, betrayals, these shifting alliances all playing out against this backdrop of mock warfare. It makes you question what's real and what's just part of the game.
Right.
And for Violet, it's so much more than just proving her skills as a writer. She's carrying the weight of Liam's betrayal, Xaden's secrets, her own growing power. It's like she's walking a tightrope over a chasm.
The excerpts really highlight her internal struggle, don't they? She wants to prove herself, to master that lightning signet. But she also knows just how destructive it can be. It's this conflict that mirrors the the big themes of the story, right? The balance between power and control, the struggle to use your abilities for good.
And then there's the Venin. They're like puppet masters, lurking in the shadows, pulling strings, making everyone distrust each other. It's unsettling.
Their tactics are insidious, aren't they? Preying on insecurities, ambitions. They understand that a kingdom divided against itself can't possibly stand. It's a reminder that the most dangerous enemies are often the ones you don't even see coming.
And Violet, she's one of the few who sees what's happening, but her warnings, they just fall on deaf ears. Navarre's leaders, they're so blinded by their own pride, their arrogance, they can't even fathom the idea of a threat they can't control.
It's the classic case of refusing to see the truth because it's too uncomfortable,
Huh?
right? Clinging to a comforting lie rather than facing a harsh reality. But ignorance is a luxury Navarre can't afford.
And the consequences of their denial, well, they're devastating. As the war games get more and more intense, the Venin's influence becomes more obvious. They're pushing the writers toward violence, destruction. It feels like the whole kingdom is about to crumble.
It really underscores the idea that the most important battles aren't always fought on a battlefield. Sometimes the greatest threat comes from within, the erosion of trust, the breakdown of unity.
Exactly. And Violet, she's forced to make these impossible choices. Who to trust, how to use her power, and ultimately, what is she willing to sacrifice to protect her kingdom?
It's a test of everything, isn't it? Her strength, her magic, her character, her compassion, and her commitment to doing what's right, even if it means going against those in power.
In her relationship with Dazen, well, it just gets more and more complicated against this backdrop of war and betrayal. There's this undeniable spark between them, but they're constantly dodging landmines, all these secrets and divided loyalties.
Their connection is both a source of strength and a potential weakness, isn't it?
Yeah.
They're drawn to each other's fire, but also afraid of getting burned. It speaks to that human need for connection, even in the darkest of times.
And the fact that their dragons, Terran and Stadal, are also bonded, it adds this whole other layer of intertwined destinies. It's like their fates are tied together no matter what.
The bond between dragon and rider, it's a recurring theme in Fourth Wing. And in this case, it really magnifies the risks and the rewards of Violet and Sutton's connections. They're not just risking their own hearts, but the lives of these incredible creatures.
It makes those moments of tenderness between them, the glances, the unspoken understanding, all the more precious. Like they're finding comfort in each other while the world's falling apart around them.
Absolutely. Their connection is like a small flame in the encroaching darkness. And it raises the stakes even higher. Can their love survive all of this? Or will it become just another casualty of war?
Those are definitely questions to keep in mind as we wrap up Fourth Wing. But one thing's for sure from these excerpts, Violet's journey is far from over. She's becoming this powerful force, not just as a dragon rider, but as a woman who questions everything, who fights for what she believes in. She's not going to be defined by what other people expect of her.
She represents the possibility of change, this hope that even in a world filled with conflict and darkness, individual courage and compassion can actually make a difference. She's a character that sticks with you.
I think that's the sign of a truly great story, right? It leaves you with questions, wanting to explore more, to understand the world and the characters more deeply.
Yeah, and from what we've seen in these excerpts, Fourth Wing delivers on all fronts. Action, intrigue, emotional depth. It's a story that'll keep you hooked until the very end.
So to our listeners, if you haven't already, I can't recommend Fourth Wing enough. Get ready for the thrill of dragonflight, the twists and turns of war and betrayal, and a love that defies all odds.
And as you journey through the pages, remember this. True strength isn't just about physical power or magical ability. It's about the choices we make, the battles we choose to fight, and the people we choose to stand with.
And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive. Until next time, happy reading.